The house isn't ours anymore. The bank is taking it over.
The only thing I can suggest is that you come to live with one of us until we can get ourselves straightened out.
Well, that's awfully nice of you, George, but your father and I thought that, well, no matter what happened, that we'd always be... Oh, never mind what we thought.
How you doing, Michael? We're recording this show from Zoom. You're in Bristol. I'm in London. It doesn't feel like a million miles away. We talk on WhatsApp all the time. Um, we've managed to maintain our relationship and friendship through pretty much not seeing each other for maybe once every few years, um, which makes the setup of the next movie, Make Way for Tomorrow, directed by, I believe, Leo McQuarrie, is it? Let me have a look. Yeah, Leo McQuarrie. All the more kind of difficult to comprehend as we sit here in 2023 in its setup. It's quite an amazing thing of how much we rely on technology, that something as much as an elderly couple being separated being such an obstacle and a reason for stakes in this movie, isn't it?
Yeah, it's interesting going back to a film from, almost 90 years ago that sort of deals with themes very much of its era, but then yes, themes that would become a lot more. Well, some of the themes in the movie are of its era. Some of the themes are just kind of evergreen. I think that the kind of passage of time and watching your parents get elderly and stuff like that is something that any generation in history would have been able to reflect on. And then, like you said, there's this kind of splitting apart of a family where everyone's living in different places and stuff like that. Yeah, that probably was quite new and novel and strange now, whereas I certainly can say from my own family that's we're all in different places, and that seems to be quite common nowadays.
Yeah, we were reviewing the movie, well, not reviewing the movie, but talking about the movie X a while back, and one of the things we talked about was how it's, I don't know, it was easier to kind of portray the elderly in a almost scary, negative light, if you will. And I think if they cast this movie nowadays, we'd probably get Robert De Niro and maybe Helen Mirren in the main role, and it would be portrayed in such a way of like, oh, it's cool to be old. Old people kind of deal with these things, but it would be them almost obtaining a second wind of life. But in this movie, they're very much, although despite not being played by elderly people, which I don't know if you realize, it's very much, this is what it's like to be old, and this is what people deal with, and in many ways it's the anti It's a Wonderful Life. And we set up the movie where this, I think one of the sons, I can't remember his name, but he's a lot more of a slick son. He comes over and he.
Well, it's funny you say his name is George, and his mother is played by George's mother from It's a Wonderful Life. So yeah, the opening shot of the movie is two actors from It's a Wonderful Life, and with the mother saying, "Oh, it's nice to see you, George." And I'm okay, very It's a Wonderful Life at this point, but yeah.
I think it was even before A Wonderful Life, actually, wasn't it? Because this is 1937. But and then we're kind of trying to figure out the family dynamic. And there's this one goofy son who comes in and he seems to be all about his parents. And then we hear kind of little tidbits of dialogue to maybe realize early on that this isn't the closest family. The grandmother character, she asks about, oh, how's my granddaughter? And I imagined her as a baby, and we were told she's a woman at this stage. And now whether that's got to do with memory or distance, we don't know. But immediately, it's kind of funny. They're almost reluctant to tell the kids that they've lost the house, and that kind of speaks to a closeness as well to maybe that they don't have with their family, where they drop this bombshell. By the way, we're losing the house. We thought it would never happen, and this brings it back to a central theme of the two central characters in this movie that I really liked. They're very passive characters in their own agency and in how they solve things, and which when it's tied with the fact that they're elderly, makes it even more tragic that they're no longer in charge of their agency. And even maybe throughout their life, you get the impression that they're very much kind of a go with the flow couple. Like there's no one going to grab this problem by the balls to solve it. And the fact that they're really old makes it was very interesting to follow these characters, I thought.
Yeah, absolutely. And like that, they are not the people that you expect to be the leads, if you want to call them the leads, which I think ultimately by the end of the movie they are the leads of the film. Like you said, we see a lot of these kind of screwball older people movies, like with, you know, actors who were big time actors. It could be Morgan Freeman, like you said, it could be De Niro, it could be, you know, any of the kind of big actors of the 70s would be the ones nowadays that you'd be sort of seeing in these movies. And like those movies are very, like, older audiences tend to like those movies. They're very well received by their target demographic and they make money and everything like that, but they're not really about the experience of being old at all. Which is completely fine, because, you know, if I watch a James Bond movie now, that's not the experience of being, you know, 40 or whatever. It's a heightened piece of escapism. But watching this movie now, it obviously came out in the 30s, and I as I was watching it, I sort of thought to myself, so this movie came out in the 30s, and then since then there's been maybe 5 or 10 other Hollywood movies about actually being old that really make any attempt to you know, explore that in a more honest way. And yes, they are absolutely go with the flow type people. That, as you said, there's allusions to that having been the case for the majority of their life, and maybe they could have been a bit more aggressive or on the ball in terms of changing their situation, but they were more just kind of like, you know, just sort of plod away with a regular, average, everyday life. And that's something very relatable for most people, I would say. You know, when you watch I think a lot of people have that sort of anxiety of like, what kind of an elderly version of my life am I making? Because going with the flow is kind of comfortable enough throughout your life, but, you know, you wonder how that's going to bear out down the road. And this is one of the many anxieties that one might feel watching this movie, is like, yeah, there isn't going to be some sort of spectacular like late life there for me necessarily, based on the way that I'm currently living my life. And yeah, it's much more interesting examination and reflection on, you know, being old than almost any movie I've seen, I would say.
Yeah, I was reading a review of this movie. I think it was made at the time, or maybe it was looked back, contemporarily speaking, and it was like, this movie is proof that everything definitely will end badly for everyone, was what they said. Yeah. But I was reading an article that it was about how people deal with debt and stuff like that, and previously it was almost a gather round the bed as somebody dies type thing. And in the last, I don't know, 50, 60, 70 years, I don't know, it's almost like hid away in a hospital. But one thing that has been hid away, and it probably speaks to your point in terms of like 5 movies, I can't think of any movies like that deals with being old in this way. Like there's things like The Straight Story, and there's an Alexander Payne
they're wacky though, aren't they?
Yeah, exactly.
About Schmidt. And then there's like Amour by Michael Haneke, but that's very maudlin and sad. And there's movies that are trying to push things to a dramatic point for younger audiences, I would argue, made by younger filmmakers. Like there was that one, is it called 45? Which was a good movie. It's about like a infidelity coming out, like that it happened years ago, kind of revealed late in life. And but there's almost nothing that's like that, just slice of life. And you know, you mentioned Alexander Payne. This movie, to me, the directors that it most evoked in terms of contemporary directors for me were Alexander Payne and Jim Jarmusch, in terms of like that, where we're just dropping in and not a huge amount is going to happen. But even still, I would say About Schmidt, which is the Alexander Payne about being old, and there's also Nebraska, which is about being old. There's still old people doing things that are out of the ordinary, like Road Trip or whatever.
Yeah,
they're not as much just the quiet moments of life. And granted, most ages, children, middle age, whatever, don't get too many movies about just average everyday life. It's usually some heightened kind of drama involved for it to be a movie. But people aged between 20 and 60, they might not get many, but they get a good few a year, not like one every 40 years or something.
The lack of Hollywood movies even about the elderly kind of speaks to the children and the characters in this movie in terms of how they feel about being old. They're kind of glad it's not them, but at the same time, they don't want to deal with it. But because it's their family member, they have to deal with it. And one thing I really love about this movie also is that they, the children are, I guess you could call them bad people, but it's also understandable in from another side of things, where they all kind of have their own lives, and it's been put upon them actually out of the blue to look after the family members. Now, and I'm sure you would step up in that situation, but it does show that the inconvenience of having your own life kind of changed by having to look after an older person. And one thing I really like what this movie does as well, it makes the characters, the elderly couple, annoying at times as well. Like, it doesn't sanctify them. Like, there's the scene where the first family takes the grandmother character, and obviously I guess bridge was a big industry at the time, I don't know, but she's teaching her bridge class, and they're kind of finding a place for the grandmother around because they're almost embarrassed by her, and she's wandering around. The granddaughter doesn't want anything to do with her really as well, because and I feel like under certain circumstances, they would make time for the grandmother, but because it's now she lives with them, everything got to do with her is an inconvenience. Like, there might be times where the granddaughter would like to have gone to the cinema with her grandmother. There might be times where the son, of course, would like her grandmother, his mother, to come over. But in this situation, it's been put upon them. So it's almost like an obligation forced upon them. So they now have to deal with her kind of wandering around during bridge, rocking awkwardly on the rocking chair, which was definitely something like out of an Alexander Payne movie, where everyone's trying to ignore it, and it's just, we hear the squeaking, and it just irritates everybody. And
that was hilarious. This movie has so much great understated comedy, and it's like, because it's not really a comedy, it's a drama, it's a melodrama. That can often be when I laugh the most, because I'm not expecting to laugh, and I don't feel like the movie's main agenda is to make me laugh. So there's several points. That scene is one of them for sure, but there's several points where, like, someone would, even just a single line of dialogue that literally made me laugh out loud, which is quite rare watching movies.
Yeah. And so they combine that moment of comedy with great moments of sentiment and pathos and romance. This is also an elderly romance, which, how often do you get to see that? So in the same sequence where she's on the rocking chair and it just builds to a crescendo of creakiness, then she gets a phone call, and we're on Skype or everyone now Zoom. He has to not get a scarf in order to make a long distance phone call, and then we only really get to see them together for a lot of the movie in the first scene, and then the final third of the film, which I'll get to in a bit. But we get this phone call where you can really see such love and care, and they open up their souls. And because everyone's in the room, it kind of almost fills this room with an energy where everyone is empathetic and everyone really cares, and everyone is counting their own blessings, which this movie has taught me. We're both in relationships, and I don't know why that's why I got extra emotional in this movie as well. But it has that effect on people whenever, both on screen and off screen, where you see moments like that just fills you with a sort of appreciation and a tragicness.
Absolutely. It's so well staged, like you said, that's a great phone conversation, and there's so much love there. And like you said, there's the financial implications of making that call, but then there's the people in the background, and anything in this movie has layers of complexity. No one's like all bad, all good, all resentful, all empathetic, or like everything. Everyone's sort of doing their best and making their way through the world. And like, it's, again, this movie is incredibly old, but even by contemporary standards, it's rare that you see a movie that has as much sort of emotional and character complexity to it. So that's very good. And it's funny, you were saying earlier about like how that maybe the children are bad children or whatever, like that they call themselves bad children. We're bad people and all that kind of stuff, because they I guess they can't fully accommodate their parents into their lives. But standards have changed so much. I imagine when this film came out that the idea of sending your parents off to an old folks home or something was probably like really modern and callous, and the norm would be, you know, you'd have a family home in where we're from. It would be a farmhouse, and the generations would just cycle through it. You'd be born in it, you'd die in it, kind of thing. And you know, you'd raise your kids, and then they'd look after you in the same house, and their kids would look after them, and so you'd always have that place in the homestead. And this movie, and this is why it's called Make Way for Tomorrow, is that yes, it's the changing of generations, make way for the new generations, but it's also like, look, this is where things are going. This is the new reality of how you're going to end up when all of your kids are off being like living in cities and doing all this kind of stuff. So I mean, it starts off in a little country farm cottage and all that. And it's clear that one of the kids is in California, and some of them are in New York, and you know that now that's the way things are going. So I would say by modern standards, we're recording this in 2023. By 2023 standards, these kids actually do a fairly good job. If you wanted to just look at how their parents are essentially becoming homeless at the beginning of the movie. They feel that they would struggle to accommodate both parents in one house, so they sort of divvy it up and go, all right, you'll have the father, I'll have the mother, and they take them on indefinitely, and they try and make it work, and it ultimately doesn't work. And I think anyone who's hosted one or more of their parents for any prolonged period of time can relate to. It's annoying. I would say, for my part, it's annoying having almost anyone, doesn't matter, right, like your best friend, your sister, like doesn't really matter who it is, having someone else in your house for a prolonged period of time, that's going to chafe over time. And parents with a whole generational divide and all the like childhood baggage and everything like that, it's very challenging. And the kids, I imagine that when did this come out? That
1937, yeah.
By 1937 standards, they might have been really dropping the ball in like how much they were delivering. But by 2023 standards, they're definitely on par with what I think society expects of people in terms of looking after their parents. And maybe that's because we built up more infrastructure to sort of solve that problem by like, putting parents away out of the way, which is, very dark when you kind of take a step back and look at it. But these things are insidious. And over the past 90 years, we've just become more and more accustomed or acceptant of, we're not going to do this thing where your parents live with you. And a lot of people do it, and certainly many other nations around the world would do it, but
Yeah.
in if this is a Hollywood movie in America now, I think it's probably less and less likely that you're going to have your parents kind of in your own house kind of as for the end of their life, so to speak.
Yeah. Just another little bit of extra context before I pick up on that point you just made. Apparently around this time there was fierce debate between like 1937 and 1940 about whether the elderly could get a pension. They didn't have pensions at that time, so apparently this movie was made around the kind of cusp of that debate as well. So it would be interesting to note that they also had literally no money and no independence, which makes the fact that they had no agency even more tragic. And just to pick up on your point, it is very modern in the sense that this speaks to more how we treat the elderly people now rather than before, like you said, to be dropping the ball. And that scene with when he has decided to kind of fob her off at the old folks' home. And the film does speak into the kind of complexity of the characters. There's the dynamic of the biological family, shall we say, in terms of the parents. And then we also see this thing interspersed among them where you also have your new family and they're your priority, and how those two things can kind of conflict with each other, put pressure on you. Because there's a scene where when the elderly dad character, he's sitting on the couch, he's basically living on the couch. They certainly don't have the funds to kind of support him, but they're doing the best they can. And it's easy to judge these characters, but in the situations that they're in, some, like you said, they do a good job. And the father-in-law character of I guess he'd be the son-in-law of the elderly couple, he's like, oh, you know what, I feel kind of bad, should we send for the mother as well? And then his own daughter is like, we would be stuck with them then. So there is that kind of thing where certain members of the family would be like, okay, well, if it was just up to me, I would prefer it this way, but I've got other people to consider. So they do a really good job of showing that. And I thought that scene when he finally... There's a lot of funny scenes and there's a lot of pure tragic scenes in this movie as well.
I was pretty much in tears for the very final moment of the movie. Yeah, you mentioned this is like a love story. That I've rarely seen a movie where I buy the love and get involved in the love on screen as much as this movie. But sorry to cut you off. Keep going.
Well, Orson Welles said this movie would make a stone cry, so that says all. But it's funny.
Sorry to interrupt you again, but
yeah.
The father character, he kept on reminding me of the old version of Orson Welles in Citizen Kane when he's in like elderly makeup. That just kept on coming into my head the whole time. But
yeah. But the scene with the old folks home, how they play that was very smart as well, in a kind of way that you can see the guy. He's really working up the courage. He's already seen the letter at this stage with the stamp of the old folks' home. It's already been established that she does not want to go there, and it seems very miserable. And for that elderly woman character to put it upon herself it's actually brilliant subtext, because he knows at this point that this is the way I interpret it anyway, he knows at this point that she has somehow figured out that she's going there. And he knows that she's letting him off the hook by being the one to suggest.
Does he know that?
There's this whole unspoken sadness.
I didn't get that. She obviously.
I feel like he does. Well,
interesting.
I feel like at a certain point in the conversation that he drops his head because he's like, "You're letting me off the hook."
Yeah.
Here.
See, I wondered that. I wondered if he knew, if he copped onto that, because people within an immediate family are incredibly perceptive to each other. They can read each other like a book. But it's interesting that you landed on that. I would probably landed a bit more on the side of he doesn't know, and she'll never tell kind of thing. And he certainly feels shame in that. Yeah, great staging. The whole her seeing the letter, then the wife showing the letter to the guy, then them talking. It's just like to take something as simple as the wife's being shipped off to an old folks home and then tease that amount of drama, but none of it dramatic or bombastic and all understated and emotionally loaded. Like, fantastic filmmaking there.
Yeah, we get a lot of staging like that. Like there's another scene where the elderly dad's glasses are broke and his friend at the shop has to read a letter for him. And it's much more tragic because of the staging, in the sense that a third party is reading that, feeling something, and then it being filtered back to the person who the letter is for in a kind of delay. So the shopkeeper puts us in the shoes of the shopkeeper reading his correspondence. And there's even a scene, and that's a lot more dramatic in a very undramatic way, of just someone reading a letter, in the sense that we're getting a delay, we're getting two people's responses in real time, and we're getting it to build. They've managed to do a kind of blocking of a letter reading scene, in the sense that he's like, this part, she says, is, I think there's a part that is like private, or there's something that's established that, where he pauses for a second and is like, this is, are you sure I should read it? And then he says, read it. So the fact that they've got no place to live, they've also got no privacy is the other thing, because he has to let another person into their relationship in terms of reading a letter. She has to let the whole room into her phone conversation. But it's almost like they are almost oblivious and immune to that, because their romance and their relationship is so strong, which we actually finally get to in the final act, which I think would be a good time to get into. For me, that was it was almost like, if we're going to have in an alternative reality, that's the fourth before sunrise, before sunset movie.
I was just going to mention
out of nowhere, we if Richard Linklater, I don't know if he's seen this movie, but that's the kind of movie I need to see. I don't know how you do it in modern day, but we get this coming together of the couple that have been separated the whole movie, besides the first scene, and then we get them coming together. And by the way, the stakes are set at this point as well with the elderly home, where his wife is like, I've never told a lie to my husband in my life, but you need to let him pretend that I'm going to stay living with you guys. So, we've seen movies like Titanic, we've seen movies like Atonement, when there's these massive stakes and this massive tragedy. This hit harder and was more tragic and more relatable. My partner came home, and she could tell I was a bit upset and emotional. And I said, I was just after watching this movie. And she said, is it sadder than Manchester by the Sea? And I took a pause and I said, yes, because this is much more likely to happen to everybody.
Right.
Like, this is much more likely a universal truth that could happen.
Yeah.
Like in
it's
any
much more unnerving in a way, because Manchester by the Sea is devastating. And I'm thinking about that scene where him and Michelle Williams meet up like randomly and like just like in passing. And that like is just, that'll break you to pieces. But when the movie's over, you're like, well, that shit didn't happen to me, and that shit only happens to like 1 out of every like 100,000 people or something, so I'm probably good. Whereas you watch this movie and it's like the whole way through the movie, that the amount of guilt I'm feeling towards my own mother, and like it's that this movie is like pretty much punishing viewing for anyone who's going to age or has parents or has children, or any, like, it's basically everyone on earth has something to reckon with in this film.
Yeah. And so we finally get the reconciliation, if you will, of this couple, where they go on this walk. I think they go to this park bench, and then to begin with, there's we see glimpses of their love through distance, but we've never really seen them interact properly until this scene in terms of their own relationship. And when they sit on the bench to begin with, and the elderly father, he's checking his watch, and it kind of seems like a little bit of an awkwardness. And I'm like, oh no, have they kind of did they not know what to say to each other? Have they lost something? And then as the walk continues and the conversation begins, they get this almost magical day in the most simplistic, believable way, because you can have that day. You can have that day when everyone's nice to you, when and there's also a backdrop to this where they're walking along the street and then he goes into the shop, and again, this is visual storytelling, which they do some very good visual storytelling for something based on a play. And he goes into the shop, and we know he goes in there because there's a wanted job sign. He goes back out, and it is not ever said again. And they didn't have anything in my size. So we know that these characters' brain clocks are spinning at a million times a second, but while they're having this stroll.
Yeah.
And there's such a time limit on this romance, in the same way of the Titanic sinking, in the same way as somebody going off to war. And this is just, you need to be at that train by 9 o'clock. You're going to be off at the home. We know this character probably doesn't have what it takes to get a job, doesn't have what it takes to make things right. And that's all subtext. That's all in the background. That's all not said.
Yeah. And the other thing is, like, because they're so old, him going to California and her going to an old folks home might actually mean that they never see each other again. And that's never stated. It's like a sort of subtext, but it's in the audience's mind the whole time. They're kind of getting towards this, finish of having to part ways, which is really, really sad.
Yeah. And when you have that juxtaposed with, maybe as we learn more about this couple, maybe the second best date or time they ever had together, minus their honeymoon, because we get this great scene where they're walking along and they're looking at an automobile, which I guess at the time was like pretty new, I guess. Yeah. And there's a salesman inside, like, and he's like, oh, I bet these suckers have money, which again is also kind of a funny line and a sad line at the same time, because we're kind of like, if you only knew. And then he comes out and he thinks he's pulling one over on them, like, oh, I'm gonna watch me sweet deal these old suckers. And then what happens is they get this beautiful ride in this automobile, and they're almost getting chauffeured around, and we hear about their relationship for the first time properly, and the awkwardness of their initial reintroduction together is gone, and we really see the love and the chemistry in this couple, which is an odd thing to say about an old couple, but it shouldn't be. But we actually see elderly chemistry, in the sense that they have a whole lifetime of experience. They finish each other's sentences. They argue in that lovable kind of like, oh, did we get married on a Wednesday? Did we get married on a Tuesday? And they just have good banter and a good back and forth. And we get this whole backstory into, oh, we never did go on another like holiday, or we this is about the only time we've ever been in a car, ever been out of our area. And it's just really sad, but it makes this one night even more like special and magical. Yeah. It's like, it's really how to do a romance movie in the most unorthodox of ways. And then we get this situation where, and then we kind of do get not to say it's a wonderful life, but we do get the world happens to like work in their favor on that day, except in the final moments. We get the salesman. The salesman is won over by them, and he gets involved in their conversation. And by the end of it, they're like, "Oh, did you think we were going to buy a car for you? We thought you were just really proud to show it off." And then he's like, "You know what? Like, they've won him over at this stage. They're like a sweet old couple, which everyone loves. Everyone loves to see romance lasting that long as well. This is the other thing. So everyone kind of falls in love with them, and he's like, "Oh, don't worry about it. I'm delighted." Like, it was actually fun having you. And then they go to the hotel where they had their honeymoon, and then there's a woman at the reception, and she's like, "Oh, well, you were here 50 years ago," and they show that the lobby has changed, and then everyone is delighted to see love lasting this long, and which makes it even more tragic again that it's probably only going to last this one night, unbeknownst to everyone else. But they've had a 50-year union that everyone else that's not their kids and family seeing, and then the hotel manager comes, and everyone is giving them time, I think, and that's kind of what we haven't seen the whole the whole movie, where everyone kind of struggles to give them time, but we get this great sequence where the hotel manager, he's really interested in the conversation. He stays a bit longer. He says, you know what, it's all on me, and make it more tragic, which you kind of are, but it is believable that you might see a sweet old couple and do all those nice things for them. And then we get the scene in the waltz where he's like, oh, Bart, you want to dance, Bart? And then they get up and they have a waltz, and it's this new waltz, and he's like, what's going on here? And then the old conductor guy takes a look and he's like, you know what, I'm going to play one song. And he plays the old waltz, but then he announces that it's like 9 o'clock, and the atmosphere changing in that room just from saying 9 o'clock. It's not iceberg. Again, it's not iceberg. It's not like this. The Europe is at war. It's like it's 9 o'clock, and they've already extended their night much longer than they could. And this is the other thing. They also phone called one of the kids who kind of understands. He's like, you know what, like, I'm ashamed anyway, but like, he didn't stop them having their night together. He's like, you know what, let them go to the airport, the train station together. So when that clock hits 9, like it's like a Cinderella doomsday call, you know. The ship is sinking, and from that moment on, it kind of leads to what you were worried about, that they might never see each other again.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, that whole night, which is the third act of the movie, is incredible. Like you said, Linklater must surely have seen this, because the whole arc of especially the first movie, Before Sunrise, but also the second one as well, that kind of like this, we've found a moment, and just like this movie with where you're saying on the park bench, it's a little awkward. It's not like that kind of atmosphere hasn't been created yet. It takes you through that whole experience, and it could be someone you've been married with for 50 years, or it could be someone that you just met on a train, like in Before Sunrise. But it's that thing of like, we thought we were just doing, we're going from A to B, doing our normal average everyday life. In this case, they're going to have a roast dinner with their kids or whatever. But then you have that connection with another person, and again, it could be someone that you've long been in love with, or someone that you've just met, but that you're like, let's follow this vibe, and let's see where this takes us. And the whole rest of the movie, you don't know what's going to happen next. You don't know what's going to happen, moment to moment, and you just follow them on this, like, and that is magical. And we've all experienced that, I think, when we've been out of our normal routine and just sort of exploring the world. It could be the city that you live in, it could be on holiday, whatever. And you're just like, you know what? I'm going to follow all these little tangents and see where things take me, and languish in the relationship and the experience I'm having with this other person. And, you go into that completely innocuously, where it's just like, this is just another scene in the movie. Then you just see it sort of building with all these little moments. Like you said, there's always subtext when he goes into the shop where it says "man wanted" in the window. There's always many different levels of thing going on. But I'm watching it, I'm just like smiling more and more, and beaming, and loving them, loving this experience. And then, as you said, as it kind of gets to the end, you're starting to become fearful, and I'm starting to think maybe this is not going to have a Hollywood ending where, some Deus Ex Machina, where suddenly, I don't know, he gets a windfall of cash or whatever it might be, and they can stay together. Because especially in those days, but even now, you'd kind of expect that would be the ending of the film. But the more it progresses, you start to have to grapple with, as they do, you start to have to take a step back out of the magic dream world of that date or whatever, and start to reckon with the reality of their situation. So the whole arc of that third act is absolutely fantastic, and very unsurprising, because I was, when in the midpoint of the movie they're making the decision that he's going to go out to California, I was like, okay, second half of the movie is going to be he's going to be in California and she's going to be with another one of the children, the wacky guy, for example, or with Nellie, the rich one. And so it's like, you go, okay, that's how the movie's going to be split in two parts. We're going to do all four of these kids, but instead they do something completely unexpected.
Yeah, that's what I thought as well. We were going to get one like the Odd Couple times 4, but I'm glad we didn't. And do you know what, Michael? It's quite an achievement where you kind of, as it's getting to the final act and the final moments, you kind of know where it's going, but you're hoping it doesn't. And even though that's the right ending for the teams, and it kind of would almost be disappointing from a movie thematic point of view if that didn't happen, because what it's trying to achieve and what it's trying to evoke. However, from a purely character investment point of view, I was hoping, and that doesn't happen to me in movies very often, when I'm watching a movie and I really hope that it works out for them, even though I kind of know it doesn't. And I just had another thought as well, with the Make Way for Tomorrow title. I finally remembered it. In the final kind of jaunt through New York, I think it is, that is them interact. For instance, there's a scene where she's like, oh, I can't drink alcohol. And it's like, no, don't worry, women are drinking alcohol now. And they kind of step into the future as a couple for the first time and for the last time. And maybe that's where the title comes from as well. I don't know. I just had that thought. But the movie is drenched in subtext, and the final line we get is well, I don't know them off by heart, but it's very nail on the head. But even that seems right, because that is what the characters would say to each other, where they're like, if I don't see you again, I love you. I think she says it. He never says I love you, but that character wouldn't as well, because he's a man in the 30s. He's not really going to say that. But and then they kind of exchange literal kind of themes that the audience have been grappling with, in terms of, if I don't see you again, and they say it nail on the head. But that kiss on screen, which again I don't think I've seen it, that's kind of like the swirling head dip kiss we'd normally get in a romance movie of the time. But it's like they kiss, they get on the train, and that's it.
Yeah,
that's it. Like we're left to wonder. It's a great time to get out of the movie, even, and very like not of his time as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And shout out to the actress whose name I'll attempt, Bula Bondi. We obviously know her from It's a Wonderful Life. I was reading that she's played Jimmy Stewart's mother in 4 movies, including Mr. Smith Goes to Washington. But she is a very convincing old lady in this movie. And when she shot this movie, she was 10 years older than us. Can you believe that? Yeah. Like, she's essentially one of our peers as a person.
Her I looked it up, right, because I was thinking, oh, she must have died really after, like a little, like I forgot she was in It's a Wonderful Life
next year or something.
That's what I thought. I was like, oh, I was like, poor thing, did she ever get to see this movie? And then I look it up. 1981. I'm like, how old did she live till 200? And then I looked up, she was like 45, and her performance is brilliant for any era. Like the guy is he's like, a few things he does is of the time, where he like has the pipe and he's angry at the doctor, and he's doing these things. Her performance is like brilliant. Like what she does with her eyes, her worries, her understatedness. Like she played an old person, and the makeup, probably because it's black and white.
Black and white always helps. Yeah.
She looked like 95. She looked like she was done.
And she, not only did she live until the 80s, she acted until 1978. So she was playing an elderly person in 1937, and then she continued to play an elderly person for 40 more years. That's insane. I mean, she might have even been playing an elderly person prior to this movie. I don't know. I've like seen her in a few movies
Yeah.
here and there, and she's always just been an old woman. But it's funny that she got into the old woman game many like decades before she was an old woman. So
Yeah. Yeah, Michael, do you know, I had a thought. This is like what good film hunting's about, because to plug the show's title perfectly, because to find something from 1937 that I hadn't heard about, that doesn't seem to be on any list that I've seen, and to be blown away by what is for me a 5-star movie, and to be able to talk about it and hopefully point people the right way is what I like, what we do this show for.
absolutely, and I think it is a fantastic film. As we've discussed, there's so much complexity to it. It's so sophisticated for its day. I mean, this is so shortly after the silent era. This is so shortly after, like, I to me, the 30s is kind of the beginning of modern film in terms of like the visual storytelling and everything, where it's not just a little jump up from photography or theater. It's like it's really come into its own as its own medium, and to already be delivering storytelling this sophisticatedly is fantastic. But I think the reason why we haven't heard of it is because it's not a genre film, it's not an adventure film, it's not a film noir, it's not like a gangster thriller or something like that. So it's a much harder sell. You know, if you just sit someone down and goes like, here's Humphrey Bogart solving a crime, people are like, yeah, I get it, I can click into that straight away. Whereas when I started watching this film, I wasn't sure of it for a while. I was like, what are we doing here? What is this? It's a melodrama, but there's no music. There's no enough that like cheesy dramatic score that gives me that kind of familiar romantic melodrama thing. It's a kind of character drama, but it's not a screwball comedy. It just felt a bit like undefined, and that's because it's got its aspirations set higher than just being like a slotting into a formula and delivering like the same old package. But what you get with that kind of neat like formulaic pigeonholing into a genre, I think, is a movie continuing its palatability for years to come. Another example would be like horror movies. Go back to like Frankenstein and stuff like that. That'll always have it will always be sellable all the time, because you can just say it's an old Universal monster movie, and then people can just throw it on and they get exactly what they're signing up for. Whereas this one, much in the same way that like a contemporary movie like Patterson might be a hard movie to sell, a hard movie to promote, a hard movie to like predict whether or not someone was going to like it, this movie probably has also struggled with that. So I actually rewatched a lot of it the other day, so I kind of watched it twice, or not in its entirety, but it certainly rewarded repeat viewings. And I would say that if anytime I watch this movie again in the future, I'll love it right from the get-go. But when I sort of turned it on initially to watch it for this podcast, it took me a while to sort of click into the rhythm of it. So I think it is a more challenging movie than the movies that are mentioned as the most iconic movie of the 30s or 40s.
Yeah, a brilliant movie. All right, Michael, thanks for coming on the show, and we'll have you on again soon.
Pleasure.